Blood pooled beneath Serafina's trembling body as she screamed through another contraction. The midwife's face went ashen, her wrinkled hands pressing futilely against the hemorrhage that wouldn't stop. "The bleeding won't cease," the old woman whispered, her voice carrying the finality of a death sentence. "She'll be gone within the hour." Thorn, the twin executioner, who'd sent 100 men to their graves without so much as a tremor in his hand, gripped Serafina's fingers with white knuckles. His scarred face, usually carved from stone, twisted with something no condemned soul had ever witnessed in those storm-gray eyes. Fear. Cale pressed his forehead against his wife's sweat-soaked temple, his breath coming in ragged gasps as he whispered prayers to gods he'd stopped believing in a decade ago. This woman, once a condemned witch they'd been ordered to watch burn at dawn, was now their entire world. 10 years of stolen happiness, 4 beautiful children sleeping in rooms down the hall, a life built from ashes and defiance. And it might all end tonight. "Shepherd's purse," Serafina gasped through clenched teeth, her voice barely audible over her own labored breathing. "Tincture, the blue bottle. Now." Thorn didn't hesitate. He was already moving his warrior's instincts, recognizing the command in her tone. Cale stayed, one hand pressed against the wound, the other cradling her face. "Stay with me," he commanded, his voice breaking on the last word. "You don't get to leave us. Not now, not after everything." The midwife shook her head, defeat written across every line of her weathered face. She'd seen this before. Too much blood, too much trauma. The fourth birth had torn something inside that shouldn't have torn. But Thorn was already returning, boots thundering across wooden floors, the glass bottle clutched in his massive hand. He uncorked it with his teeth, tilted Serafina's head back with practiced gentleness, and poured the bitter liquid down her throat. She coughed, swallowed, her body convulsing with effort, and waited. Cale pressed harder on the wound, his own blood mixing with hers where his nails dug into his palms. Thorn's hand found hers again, and together they formed a trinity of desperation and hope. The bleeding slowed, not stopped, but slowed. The midwife's eyes widened. She grabbed clean linen and packed the wound with newfound urgency, her movements sharp and efficient, now that death wasn't guaranteed. Minutes crawled by like hours. And then a cry. Thin and reedy at first, then stronger. Louder, the sound of new life demanding to be heard. The midwife lifted a tiny squirming body, blood-covered, perfect. A son. "Casimir," Serafina breathed, tears streaming down her temples into sweat-dampened golden hair. "His name is Casimir." Thorn took the infant with hands that had wielded executioner's blades for 15 years, cradling the fragile life against his scarred chest. Cale's forehead remained pressed to Serafina's, his tears falling onto her flushed cheeks. "You scared us," he whispered. It wasn't an accusation, it was a confession. Serafina's lips curved into a weak smile. "Not the first time." Thorn's rare laugh, deep and genuine, a sound reserved only for moments like this, filled the birthing room. He placed Casimir into his mother's arms, then bent to kiss her forehead with reverence, usually reserved for holy relics. "Not the last time either, knowing you," he murmured. The midwife finished her work in silence, cleaning and bandaging with the efficiency of long practice. When she finally stepped back, she looked at the three of them, this impossible trinity, and shook her head. 10 years I've known you," she said quietly. 10 years of watching something that shouldn't work somehow thrive. You're blessed, all of you, by something far older than the church's narrow God." She gathered her supplies and left them alone. The moment the door clicked shut, Cale finally allowed himself to collapse into the chair beside the bed, his entire body shaking with aftermath. Thorn remained standing, watchful, his hand resting on the pommel of the sword he no longer wore, but whose weight he still felt in muscle memory. Serafina looked down at Casimir, their fourth miracle, their youngest son, and felt the familiar ache of gratitude so profound it hurt. 4 children now, 4 living testaments to a love that had started in a dungeon cell on the eve of her execution. "Tell me again," she whispered, her voice hoarse from screaming. "How did we get here?" Cale lifted his head, red-rimmed eyes meeting hers with infinite tenderness. "You already know," he said softly. "I want to hear it anyway." Thorn moved to the window, staring out at the northern wilderness that had become their sanctuary. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of memory. 10 years ago, he began, we walked into a cell to watch a woman burn, and suddenly they were no longer in the warm birthing room with its scent of blood and new life. With a shriek that made Serafina's teeth ache, she lifted her head from cold stone, blinking against torchlight that felt like daggers after 3 days of near total darkness. 2 massive figures filled the doorway, silhouetted against flickering orange. Identical in build and height, Broad shoulders that barely fit through the frame. Bodies built for violence. The twin executioners. They'd come early. The execution wasn't scheduled until dawn, but here they stood at midnight, torches in hand, faces hidden in shadow. Serafina's heart hammered against her ribs, but she refused to cower. 3 days chained to this wall had taught her that begging accomplished nothing. The guards didn't care. The magistrate didn't care. Father Matthias certainly didn't care. She was already dead, had been since the moment the gavel fell. So she lifted her chin and met their approach with eyes that had wept themselves dry. The taller one, or perhaps they were the same height, it was impossible to tell in the darkness, stepped forward first. Torchlight caught the scar running down his left cheek, a pale line through sun-darkened skin. "Serafina Whitlock," he said. His voice was deep, resonant, the kind that vibrated through stone. "We are Thorn and Kale Ravenshade Royal Executioners assigned to oversee your final hours." The second twin moved into the light. No scar on his face, but eyes the color of winter storms. The same dark hair, though his was cut shorter. The same dangerous grace in every movement. "The law requires that a condemned witch be attended through her last night." This one continued, his voice identical to his brother's, but somehow warmer. "To ensure you don't use dark magic to escape your fate." The absurdity of it almost made Serafina laugh. What magic? She had nothing. No power, no hope, no way out of this nightmare. Just cold stone and iron chains and the certain knowledge that dawn would bring agony beyond imagination. "I'm not a witch," she said. Her voice came out ragged from 3 days of screaming her innocence to guards who'd stopped listening after the first hour. "I've never practiced magic. I'm a healer. That's all I've ever been." "They all say that," the scarred one, Thorn replied. But something in his tone wasn't mockery, something softer. Almost like he believed her. Kale moved closer, setting down a basket. The scent hit Serafina like a physical blow. Fresh bread, roasted meat, clean water, real food. Not the moldy scraps the guards had tossed through the door twice in 3 days. "The condemned are entitled to a final meal," Kale explained, kneeling so his eyes were level with hers. Up close, she could see they were silver gray, holding depths she couldn't fathom. "We brought provisions." Serafina stared at the basket like it might contain serpents. "Why show me kindness? You're executioners. You're here to watch me burn." "We're here to do our duty," Thorn said, crouching on her other side. Now she was flanked by their larger frames, their heat radiating through the cold dungeon air. "But our duty doesn't require cruelty." Kale reached into the basket and pulled out bread, tearing off a piece. He held it to her lips with surprising gentleness for a man whose hands were stained with the blood of the condemned. "Eat," he said softly. "You'll need strength." "For what?" Serafina asked, bitter laughter bubbling up from somewhere deep and broken. "For burning. Does it matter if I'm strong when they tie me to the stake?" "It matters," Kale replied, his voice carrying unexpected conviction. "Everything matters until the last breath." Something in how he said it, how they both looked at her, with eyes that held neither contempt nor pity, but something closer to respect, made tears spring forth again. She'd thought herself cried out, but apparently grief had deeper reserves than she'd known. She let Kyle feed her the bread. It was fresh, still warm from the baker's oven, and she nearly sobbed at the simple pleasure of it. How long since she'd eaten anything but stale crusts and moldy cheese? Thorn held a water skin to her lips, and she drank gratefully cool liquid, soothing her parched throat. "Thank you," she whispered when she could speak again. "Save your gratitude." Thorn said, his expression unreadable in the flickering torchlight. "The night is long and there are things we must discuss." Fear spiked through her exhaustion. What kind of things? What did executioners need to discuss with the condemned beyond the mechanics of death? But Kale's hand came up to brush a strand of golden hair from her face, the gesture surprisingly tender for a man built like a warrior. "We need to understand the truth," he said quietly. "Starting with this, how did a woman your age remain untouched by any man?" Heat flooded Serafina's cheeks despite the cold. They knew, of course they knew. The magistrate's physician had examined her, confirmed her virginity as part of the trial's humiliation. "How did you—" "It's in the records," Thorn explained, his tone matter-of-fact. "The physician noted it, said it was unusual for a woman of 23 years to be unclaimed." The way he said unclaimed sent an unexpected flutter through her belly. Serafina looked between them, these two massive men who could do anything they wanted in this locked cell, and felt a strange mixture of fear and something else, something she had no name for. "I never wanted the men in my village," she said quietly, meeting first Kale's gaze, then Thorn's. "They were rough, crude. They saw women as property to be used. I wanted something different. What did you want? Kale asked, and there was genuine curiosity in his voice. Serafina took a breath, wondering why she was answering honestly. Maybe because she was already dead. Maybe because these men, for all their capacity for violence, looked at her like she was a person rather than a witch to be burned. I wanted to be seen, she admitted. Really seen. Not just for my face or my body, but for me. I wanted someone who would care about my pleasure, not just their own. I wanted to matter. The twins exchanged a glance, some silent communication passing between them that she couldn't interpret. Then Thorne spoke, his words measured and deliberate. The charges against you. Tell us everything. So she did. She told them about her mother who taught her to brew healing teas before the plague took her 5 years ago. About the herbs she grew in her garden, chamomile for sleep, willow bark, for fever, yarrow, for wounds. She told them about 8-year-old Emma, the farmer's daughter, who'd been burning with fever for 3 days. About how Emma's mother had begged Serafina for help when the village physician pronounced the child beyond saving. I gave her willow bark tea, Serafina said, her voice shaking with remembered fear and fury, and cool compresses to bring down the fever. I sat with her through the night. By morning, the fever had broken. Emma lived. When Father Matthias called it witchcraft, Kale said softly, it wasn't a question. He said I'd used dark magic to cheat death, that I must have made a bargain with demons. When I tried to explain it was just medicine, just a knowledge my mother had passed down, he said that knowledge itself was demonic, that only God has the right to decide who lives and dies. Thorne's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping beneath the scar on his cheek. What about Magistrate Blackthorn's son? The memory made Serafina's stomach turn. She closed her eyes, but the images came anyway. Lucian Blackthorn tried to force himself on me, she said flatly. In the market square in broad daylight. He was drunk. He grabbed me, started tearing at my clothes. I fought him off with a cast iron pan, broke his nose, gave him a scar he'll carry for life. Good, Kale said with quiet venom. His father decided I'd bewitched Lucian. That no son of his would want a common healer unless she'd use magic to seduce him. The crop failures gave them the perfect excuse. Drought ruined the harvest, but it was easier to blame a witch than admit the magistrate had mismanaged the grain stores. Thorne's hand found hers where it lay shackled against cold stone. His fingers were warm, calloused, surprisingly gentle as they wrapped around hers. We're listening now, he said simply. What good does it do? Serafina whispered, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. You can't stop what happens at dawn. The sentence is passed. The pyre is built. I'm going to die screaming, and everyone I ever helped will watch and believe I deserved it. Maybe, Kale said, his thumb brushing away her tears with unexpected tenderness. Maybe not. The night isn't over yet. Something in his tone made her look up sharply. What do you mean? The twins exchanged another glance. Some decision passed between them in that silent language only they shared. Then Thorne spoke, his voice low and serious. We've been executioners for 15 years. We've sent many to death. Murderers, traitors, those who truly deserved their fate. His eyes held hers unflinching. But we've also seen innocent people die because it was convenient, because someone powerful wanted them gone. We've learned to recognize the difference. And you think I'm innocent? Hope flared in Serafina's chest, fragile and desperate as a candle in wind. We think, Kale said carefully, that the evidence against you is thin, that your real crime was being a woman with knowledge and independence, that you threatened men who wanted to control you. But that doesn't change anything, Serafina said bitterly. The sentence stands. Maybe, Thorne repeated his brother's word, unless we find a reason to delay the execution, to demand a retrial, to make enough noise that someone important has to listen. How would you do that? She didn't dare let herself hope, but couldn't help asking. Kale's hand came up to cup her face, his palm warm against her cold skin. By gathering evidence tonight, by asking the right questions, by making sure that if you burn tomorrow, the world knows exactly why. And if we can cast enough doubt on the charges, if we can get word to the right people, the king himself might intervene, Thorne finished. Lord Chancellor William Ashford owes us a blood debt. He's one of the few honest men left in the capital. If we send word tonight with enough evidence of your innocence, enough questions about the proceedings, we might buy you time. It was a slim hope, a thread so thin it might snap at any moment. But it was more than Serafina had possessed an hour ago when these men walked through her door. Why would you do this for me? She asked, searching their faces. You don't know me. I'm nothing to you. Thorne's expression softened in a way that transformed his harsh features into something almost gentle. You're not nothing. You're a woman who doesn't deserve to die. That's enough. And Kyle added his thumb, tracing her jawline with deliberate slowness. There are other reasons. Reasons we probably shouldn't speak of, but that make us want to fight for you nonetheless. The way he was touching her, the way Thorne still held her hand, suddenly felt different. More charged, more intentional. Seraphina's breath caught as she recognized what she saw in their eyes. Desire, raw and undeniable. You can't mean that, she whispered. I'm a prisoner, about to be executed. You're executioners. This is impossible. Many impossible things happen in the darkness before dawn, Thorne said quietly. And we've learned not to waste precious time pretending we don't feel what we feel. Kale's fingers moved from her face to her throat, tracing the line of her pulse where it hammered wildly beneath pale skin. Your heart is racing. Is that fear or something else? Seraphina knew she should say fear, knew she should push them away, maintain whatever dignity remained to a condemned witch in chains. But she'd spent 23 years being good, being proper, being what everyone expected. And where had it gotten her chained in a dungeon cell awaiting execution by fire? If these were truly her last hours, didn't she deserve to choose how to spend them? Something else, she admitted, her voice barely audible in the torchlit darkness. The admission hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility. Thorne's grip on her hand tightened. Kale's fingers continued their exploration of her throat, her collarbone, the hollow at the base of her neck, where her pulse hammered like a caged bird. We shouldn't, Thorne said, but he didn't move away. You're condemned untouched. Taking advantage of your situation would be unforgivable. I'm not asking you to take advantage, Seraphina heard herself say, shocked by her own boldness. I'm asking you to give me something real, something that's mine. If I'm going to die tomorrow, I want to know what it feels like to be wanted, to be touched by men who actually see me. Kale's eyes darkened with hunger barely restrained. You don't know what you're asking for. We're not gentlemen, Seraphina. We're executioners, warriors. Our hands have killed more people than we can count. But you're being gentle with me now, she pointed out. Your hands are capable of tenderness. I can feel it. For now, Thorne warned, his voice rough with something that sent heat spiraling through her body. But if we start down this path, we won't be able to stop. Both of us would want you. Both of us would claim you. The implication stole her breath. Two men. Both of them. The impossibility of it should have terrified her. Instead, it made her feel alive in a way she'd never experienced. Then teach me, she whispered, meeting first Thorne's eyes, then Kale's. Show me. Give me one night where I'm not a witch or a prisoner or a victim. Give me one night where I'm just a woman being desired by men I desire in return. The confession hung between them like a drawn blade, dangerous, irrevocable, changing everything. Thorne's eyes blazed with something fierce and hungry. Kale's breathing grew heavier, his hand still resting against Seraphina's throat, where he could feel every racing beat of her heart. If we do this, Kale said carefully, each word weighted with intent, there's no going back. Even if we manage to save you, even if we get you a retrial and prove your innocence, you'll never be the untouched maiden again. Your virtue will be gone. Some would say we've ruined you. Seraphina almost laughed at the bitter irony. My virtue is going to burn with me at dawn. At least this way it means something. At least this way I choose how to spend my last night. Thorne leaned closer, his breath warm against her ear. And if we save you, if we manage to prove your innocence and get you free, what then? Then I'll have something beautiful to remember instead of just terror and pain, she whispered. Then I'll know what it feels like to be truly alive before facing death. And if by some miracle I survive, I'll have known pleasure from men who treated me with respect even when I had no power to demand it. The logic seemed to break through their final resistance. Kale's hand slid into her hair, fingers tangling in golden strands with surprising gentleness, despite his obvious strength. He tilted her head back so she had to meet his gaze. Last chance to change your mind, he said, voice rough with barely controlled desire. Once we start, we won't stop until you've experienced everything you've been missing. Every touch, every sensation, every pleasure your body is capable of feeling. We'll be thorough, Thorne added, his face closer now, close enough that she could see gold flecks in his storm gray eyes. We'll be patient, but we will claim you completely. Both of us. Yes, Seraphina breathed the word escaping before she could second-guess herself. Please, I want this. I want you both. The words were barely out of her mouth before Kale's lips descended on hers. The kiss was nothing like the chaste pecks she'd imagined in her innocent dreams. It was consuming, demanding. His mouth moved against hers with skill that made her head spin, coaxing her lips apart with gentle pressure. When his tongue traced the seam of her mouth, she gasped, and he took the invitation, tasting her with devastating thoroughness. She'd never been kissed before, had no reference for what was good or bad, but instinct told her this was extraordinary, the way he explored her mouth like he was mapping territory he intended to conquer and cherish in equal measure. When Kale finally pulled back, Serafina was breathless, her lips tingling, her entire body awakened to sensations she'd never known existed. Before she could recover, Thorn turned her face toward him and kissed her with equal intensity but different technique. Where Kale had been demanding, Thorn was coaxing. His lips moved against hers in a rhythm that made her melt into him. His tongue danced with hers, teaching her how to kiss back, rewarding her attempts with low sounds of approval that vibrated through her chest. Beautiful, Thorn murmured against her mouth when he finally released her. So responsive, so eager to learn. The chains, Kale said, his voice rougher than before, edged with need. We need to remove them. Can't touch her properly with iron in the way. Serafina's heart leaped with hope, even as her body thrummed with new awareness. You're freeing me. Not exactly, Thorn said, producing a key from his belt. We're making you more comfortable. But you're still under our watch for the night, still in our care. Understand, the possessive edge to his words shouldn't have thrilled her. But it did. She nodded, watching as he unlocked the manacles around her wrists. The relief was immediate and overwhelming. 3 days chained had left her arms numb, her shoulders screaming with pain. Now as the iron fell away, she could move freely for the first time since her sentencing. Kael caught her hands before she could lower them, examining the raw, bleeding skin where the manacles had cut into her wrists. His expression darkened with something that looked like fury. They hurt you, he said, and it wasn't a question. It's nothing, Serafina said quickly, not wanting to break the spell of this impossible moment. Just scratches. It's not nothing, Thorn said grimly, pulling a small clay pot from the basket they'd brought. We'll treat these. Can't have you marked by iron when there are better ways to mark your skin. The promise in his words sent shivers down her spine. She watched as Thorn applied a soothing salve to her wrists, his large hands incredibly gentle, as he worked the medicine into her torn skin. It stung briefly, then eased the pain in a way that brought tears to her eyes, not from hurt, from kindness. These men, these executioners who dealt in death, were showing her more tenderness than anyone had in the 5 years since her mother died. Thank you, she whispered, her voice breaking. You'll thank us properly later, Kale said with a hint of dark promise. He helped her to her feet, supporting her when her legs threatened to buckle from disuse. We're not done preparing you. They guided her to the corner where a bucket of clean water waited, fresh towels folded beside it. Serafina looked at them questioningly. We can't touch you properly while you're covered in dungeon filth. Thorn explained, his eyes hot with promise. Let us wash you. Let us care for you. The intimacy of the offer made her blush, but she nodded. She'd been in the same torn shift for 3 days, wearing nothing but rags stained with sweat and fear and despair. The idea of being clean again felt like luxury beyond measure. Kale's hands went to the ragged hem of her shift, and he paused, waiting for permission. Yes, she breathed. He lifted the garment over her head in one smooth motion, and suddenly she stood before them completely bare, exposed, vulnerable in a way that should have terrified her. But the way they looked at her with reverence, rather than crude hunger, made her feel powerful instead of powerless. By all the gods. Thorn breathed, his gaze traveling over her curves with open appreciation. You're perfect. Perfect, Kale agreed, his eyes equally worshipful as he took in her pale skin, the golden hair that fell to her waist, the curves that had been hidden beneath shapeless prison rags. How could anyone want to destroy something so beautiful? They wet towels in the bucket, wrung them out, and began to wash her with slow, deliberate care. Thorn worked on her upper body while Kao focused below their hands, mapping every inch of her skin as they cleaned away dirt and sweat in 3 days of dungeon grime. The touches were intimate but not crude, thorough but not rushed. Serafina found herself relaxing into their care despite the strangeness of the situation, 2 massive warriors bathing a condemned woman in a prison cell at midnight. When Thorn's cloth-covered hands swept over the swell of her breast, she gasped at the unexpected sensation. He paused, meeting her eyes with silent question. When she didn't pull away, he continued, his touch growing bolder. His thumb brushed over the sensitive peak through the damp cloth until it hardened beneath his attention. So responsive, he murmured, approval warming his voice. Does this feel good? Yes, she admitted breathlessly, shocked by how much truth that single word contained. And this, Kale's hands had moved to her inner thighs, washing with firm strokes that made her legs tremble. He was getting dangerously close to the place no man had ever touched, the center of her, that was already responding to their attention in ways she didn't fully understand. Yes, she whispered again, the word becoming a mantra of surrender. They continued their ministrations, their touches growing progressively more intimate, more deliberately arousing. By the time they finished washing, her Serafina was trembling with need, her body aching for something she'd never experienced but desperately wanted. Thorn wrapped her in a clean blanket, pulling her against his broad chest, while Kael dried her legs with gentle hands. The contrast between their size and strength and their careful handling of her made her feel cherished, protected despite the impossible circumstances. Better? Thorn asked, his lips brushing her temple. Yes, she managed, though it was only partial truth. But also worse, you've made me want things I've never wanted before. Good up at that, Kale said, his hand sliding up her calf with deliberate slowness. Because we're just getting started. They guided her to the corner where they'd laid out clean blankets and furs, creating a nest of softness in the harsh stone cell. The transformation was remarkable. What had been cold and brutal now felt almost comfortable, warm even. Thorn lowered her gently onto the makeshift bed, while Kael adjusted the torches, banking them so the light was softer. More intimate. The flickering orange glow cast dancing shadows across the stone walls, creating pockets of darkness and warmth. We're going to touch you now, Thorn said, settling beside her, his large frame somehow managing to look comfortable on the simple bedding. Going to teach you what your body can feel. But I need you to promise something first. What? Serafina asked, her heart racing with anticipation and the slightest thread of fear. If anything we do frightens you or hurts you, you tell us immediately. You have the power to stop this anytime. Understand, the irony of having power in this cell where she was utterly powerless wasn't lost on her. But she appreciated the gesture, the way they were trying to give her agency, even when they held all the actual control. I understand, she said softly. I promise. Kyle lay on her other side, and suddenly she was sheltered between two warriors, their larger bodies creating a cocoon of warmth and safety. Their hands began to move over her skin, exploring, learning, finding the places that made her gasp and the spots that made her moan. You're so soft, Kale murmured, his palm sliding over her stomach, her ribs the gentle slope of her breast. Like silk in moonlight. Thorn's mouth found the curve of her neck, kissing and nibbling with careful attention until she was arching into the sensation. Sensitive here, he noted with satisfaction. Good to know. Their touches grew bolder, more purposeful. Thorn's hand cupped her breast fully now, his thumb circling the hardened peak until Serafina cried out with pleasure she'd never imagined. Kale's hand slid between her legs, his fingers gentle as they explored folds already slick with arousal. So wet, Kale said with clear satisfaction. His voice dropped to a register that sent heat pooling low in her belly. Your body knows what it wants, even if your mind hasn't caught up yet. Serafina couldn't form words, could only feel, only surrender to the sensations they were creating. Thorn's mouth moved lower, finding the sensitive peak of her breast and taking it between his lips. The wet heat of his tongue combined with the gentle suction made stars burst behind her closed eyes. Meanwhile, Kael's fingers found the bundle of nerves at the apex of her thighs, circling with practiced skill. The dual assault on her senses was overwhelming, too much and not enough all at once. She'd touched herself before in the darkness of her cottage, had discovered that certain movements brought pleasure, but it had never felt like this. Never this consuming, this all-encompassing. That's it, Kale encouraged as she writhed between them, her body moving of its own accord, seeking more of whatever they were doing. Let yourself feel it. Don't fight it. I can't, she gasped, overwhelmed by sensation. It's too much. You can, Thorn said against her skin, his voice firm with command. We've got you. You're safe. Let go. His mouth continued its attention to her breast, while Kael's fingers worked magic between her legs, building pleasure so intense she thought she might shatter from it. The pressure grew and grew, coiling tighter in her core until Serafina was sobbing with the intensity of it. She'd never felt anything like this building wave that threatened to crash over her and pull her under. Let go, they commanded together, their voices blending into one. And she did. The release crashed over her like a physical force, pulling her under, drowning her in sensations so intense she screamed their names. Her body convulsed with pleasure that radiated from her center to every extremity, wave after wave of ecstasy that seemed to go on forever. Through it all, they held her, touched her, drew out every tremor and aftershock until she collapsed boneless and trembling against the furs. Beautiful, Thorn murmured, pressing kisses to her flushed skin. Absolutely beautiful. Kale's hand moved to her face, turning her toward him so he could kiss her deeply. She could taste herself on his fingers where they'd touched her most intimately, and instead of shame, she felt a surge of power. These men had shown her what her body was capable of feeling, had given her pleasure beyond anything she'd imagined. That was just the beginning, Kale said when he broke the kiss, his gaze blazing with promise. Your first peak, but far from your last tonight. I don't think I can survive more, Serafina admitted honestly, her body still trembling with aftershocks. You can, Thorn assured her, his features soft with something that looked almost like tenderness. Because we're going to spend all night teaching you exactly what you've been missing. They gave her time to recover, holding her between them, their hands stroking soothing patterns on her sensitized skin. But the reprieve was temporary. Soon Kale's kisses grew more demanding. Thorn's touches became more purposeful. And Serafina felt her body responding again, despite the impossibility of it, heat-building desire rekindling. Tell us about your life before, Kale said softly, his fingers tracing lazy circles on her hip, before the accusations. What did you dream of? The question surprised her. She'd expected more physical attention, not conversation. But perhaps they were giving her body time to recover while keeping her engaged. I wanted to be a healer, Serafina answered truthfully, her voice still breathless. A real one with proper training. I wanted to study herbs and medicine to help people without fear of being called a witch for it. I wanted a small cottage with a garden where I could grow healing plants. And love, Thorn asked, his hand resting warm against her ribs. Did you dream of that? Sometimes, she admitted, but not the kind the village offered. I wanted partnership, respect, someone who valued my mind as much as my body. And passion. Kale's hand slid higher on her thigh, making her breath catch. Heat flooded her cheeks despite everything they'd already done. I didn't know what passion truly meant until tonight. Well, then let us show you more, Thorn said, his voice dropping to that register that made her insides clench with want. Let us give you every dream you've been denied. They began touching her again, and this time there was more urgency in their movements. Their kisses grew deeper, their hands more demanding. Thorn positioned himself above her, while Kale moved to her side, both of them focused on her with single-minded intensity. Both of you, she asked, voice shaking with anticipation and the faintest thread of fear. At the same time, and not yet, Thorn said, gently brushing golden hair back from her face. You're not ready for that, but we'll both pleasure you, both learn what makes you scream our names. Yes, she breathed, surrendering completely. Please. Thorn's mouth descended on hers again, kissing her with a thoroughness that made her forget her own name. His hands roamed her body, learning every curve, every dip, every place that made her gasp. Meanwhile, Kael's mouth blazed a trail down her body, kissing, licking, nibbling his way from her shoulder to her breast to her stomach. When his mouth finally reached the apex of her thighs, Serafina's entire body jolted with shocked pleasure. The sensation was unlike anything she'd imagined. Wet heat and skilled movements that had her crying out within seconds. Thorn swallowed her moans with his kisses, his hands continuing their exploration, while his brother worked between her legs with devastating expertise. Kale's tongue circled and probed, finding spots that made her see stars. When he slid a finger inside her, stretching her gently, carefully, she thought she might come apart from the dual sensations. So tight, Kale murmured it against her sensitive flesh, his breath hot and maddening. We'll need to prepare you carefully before either of us can claim you properly. The reminder of what was coming sent fresh arousal flooding through her. Thorn's hand moved to join his brother's, and she felt both their fingers working together, stretching her, readying her for something bigger. Does it hurt? Thorn asked, watching her face intently for any sign of pain. No. Serafina gasped, overwhelmed by the fullness, the pressure, the building pleasure. It feels full, but good. So good. That's just 2 fingers, Kale said, his voice rough with barely restrained desire. Imagine how it will feel when it's us filling you, when we're buried deep inside claiming every inch. The words combined with the physical sensations pushed her toward the edge again. Serafina writhed between them, her hands clutching at Thorn's broad shoulders, seeking anchor in the storm of pleasure. Please, she begged, though she wasn't entirely sure what she was begging for. Please, what? Thorn demanded, his gaze boring into hers. Tell us what you need. I need you. I need you, she gasped, the words tumbling out uncensored. Inside me. Both of you, I need to know what it feels like to be claimed completely. The twins exchanged a heated look over her trembling body, some silent communication passing between them that she couldn't decipher. Then Kyle withdrew his fingers, making her whimper at the loss. He moved up her body while Thorn shifted to the side, and suddenly Kale was positioned between her legs, the hard length of him pressing against her entrance. Are you certain? Kale asked, his voice strained with the effort of control. Once I take your innocence, there's no going back. You'll belong to us completely. I'm certain, Serafina said firmly, meeting his eyes without flinching. I want this. I choose this. Kale's expression softened even as his eyes blazed with hunger. Then hold on to Thorn, because I'm not going to be gentle. You wanted to feel alive, Serafina. I'm going to make you feel so alive you'll never forget this night. Before she could respond, he pushed forward, breaching her entrance in one firm thrust that stole her breath and filled her completely. The sensation was overwhelming pain and pleasure mixing in ways she couldn't separate. She cried out, her hands fisting in Thorn's dark hair as Kael's considerable length stretched her beyond anything fingers could have prepared her for. Breathe. Thorn coached his hands, framing her face with surprising gentleness. The pain will pass, I promise. And it did. As her body adjusted, as Kael held perfectly still to give her time, the burning sensation faded. What remained was a fullness that felt right, perfect, like this was how it was always meant to be. Better? Kael asked through clenched teeth, every muscle in his body taut with the effort of restraint. Better, she confirmed, her voice steadier now. You can move. Please move. Kael groaned and began to withdraw slowly, then push back in. The friction was exquisite, sending sparks of pleasure through her body that built with each careful thrust. He set a steady rhythm, deep and thorough, claiming her with practiced skill. Meanwhile, Thorn's mouth found hers again, his kiss swallowing her cries of pleasure. His hands moved over her body, adding to the sensations until Serafina thought she might combust from the intensity of it all. So perfect. Kael gritted out, his control starting to fray at the edges. You feel incredible, Serafina. Like you were made for this. Made for us. The praise made her clench around him, involuntarily drawing a curse from his lips. His thrusts grew harder, faster, more desperate. I'm close, Serafina gasped against Thorn's mouth, feeling that familiar building pressure, but somehow more intense than before. I'm going to tie him, then let go, Thorn commanded, his hands slipping between their bodies to find that sensitive bundle of nerves. Show him how perfect you are. The dual stimulation, Kael's powerful thrusts combined with the Thorn's skilled fingers, pushed her over the edge into freefall. Serafina shattered with a scream that echoed off stone walls, her body clamping down on Kael with such force that he followed her over the edge with a roar. His release flooded her in hot pulses as he buried himself to the hilt, his powerful body shuddering with the intensity of his climax. They collapsed together, both breathing hard, hearts hammering against each other. Kael remained inside her for a long moment, his forehead pressed to hers, his gaze searching her face. Mine, he murmured against her lips, the word carrying weight beyond simple possession. Ours now, Serafina. Completely and utterly ours. Ours, Thorn agreed from beside them, his hand stroking her sweat-dampened hair with surprising tenderness. No matter what happens at dawn, no matter what the magistrate or the priest or the whole kingdom says, you belong to us now. Serafina felt tears spring to her eyes, not from pain or regret, but from the overwhelming emotion of being claimed so thoroughly. These men who dealt in death had given her life in its most primal, beautiful form. When Kael finally withdrew, she felt the loss acutely. But Thorn was already there with a damp cloth, cleaning her, gently tending to her, with the same care a husband might show his beloved wife. The intimacy of it, the aftercare following passion, moved her almost as much as the act itself. How do you feel? Thorn asked quietly, his features soft in the torchlight. Changed, Serafina admitted honestly. Like I'm not the same person who walked into this cell 3 days ago. You're not, Kael said, settling beside her and pulling her against his chest. That woman was a victim. This woman is a survivor. There's a difference, Amano. Thorn lay on her other side, and once again she was cocooned in their warmth, their larger bodies creating a barrier against the world. But even as exhaustion pulled at her, even as her body ached in new and unfamiliar ways, her mind couldn't stop circling back to the inevitable. What happens now? She asked softly, her fingers tracing idle patterns on Kael's chest. You've taken my innocence, given me something beautiful. But the sentence still stands. Dawn is coming. Now we write letters, Thorn said, his tone shifting from lover to strategist. Send word to every contact we have in the capital. Make enough noise that someone powerful has to listen. He rose from the bedding, moving to the basket they'd brought. From beneath the food, he pulled parchment ink and a quill. Kael shifted so Serafina could rest more comfortably against him, while his twin brother began to write with quick, efficient strokes. Lord Chancellor William Ashford, Thorne said as he wrote. 15 years ago, Cale and I pulled him from a burning building during the Western Rebellion. We carried him 3 miles through enemy territory with arrows raining down around us. He swore a blood debt that day. Will he honor it? Serafina asked, hardly daring to hope. William is one of the few honest men left in King Edward's court. Cale replied, his hand stroking her hair absently. If he says he owes a debt, he'll pay it. The question is whether he can act fast enough. Thorne's quill scratched across parchment with urgency. Serafina watched him work, this massive warrior who killed with such efficiency, now wielding words as weapons instead of blades. I'm detailing the evidence against you, Thorne explained without looking up. Or rather, the lack of it. Willow bark tea is documented medicine, not witchcraft. Self-defense against attempted rape is justified by kingdom law. And crop failure during drought is natural disaster, not demonic curse. Father Matthias won't see it that way, Serafina said bitterly. To him, any knowledge a woman possesses is suspect. Father Matthias is a zealot, Cale said with quiet venom, and zealots make enemies. William will know how to exploit that. Thorne sealed the first letter with wax, then began a second, and a third. By the time he finished, he'd written to 5 different people. Lord Chancellor Ashford, 2 members of the King's Council, a retired general who owed them favors, and surprisingly, the King's own sister, Princess Catherine. The princess? Serafina asked, confused. A rare smile crossed Thorne's face. We saved her life during an assassination attempt 2 years ago. Took a blade meant for her heart. She's been looking for a way to repay us ever since. And you never called in that favor until now. Serafina felt something warm bloom in her chest, something dangerously close to hope mixed with overwhelming gratitude. For me, for you, both twins said in unison. Cale's arms tightened around her. We told you you belong to us now. We protect what's ours. Thorne returned to the bedding, tucking the sealed letters into his belt. Cale will deliver these at first light. He'll ride hard for the capital, get them into the right hands. It's a day's journey if he doesn't stop. That means the earliest response could come tomorrow night. But the execution is scheduled for dawn, Serafina said, her brief hope flickering like a candle in wind. Which is why I'll be arguing for a delay, Thorne explained. As your assigned executioner, I have the right to request postponement if I suspect improper procedure. It won't buy us much time, maybe a day, 2 at most, but it might be enough. And if it's not, the question hung heavy between them. Cale's hand found hers in the darkness, his fingers lacing through hers, with surprising tenderness for a man who'd just claimed her with such intensity. Then we have other options, he said quietly, his tone carrying an edge that sent shivers down her spine. Options we didn't want to use because they would brand us traitors. But if it's between that and watching you burn, the choice is simple. Serafina sat up, turning to look at him with wide eyes. I won't let you throw away your lives for me. You've already given me more than I ever hoped for. You've made my last night beautiful. That's enough. It's not enough, Thorne said fiercely, his gaze blazing in the torchlight. We've claimed you, Serafina. That means we protect what's ours, no matter the cost. Even if it means running, she asked. Leaving everything behind. Even then, Cale confirmed, we're executioners. We know how to disappear. We have coin-saved contacts in other kingdoms. The northern territories beyond the Frost Peaks don't recognize King Edward's authority. We could start fresh there. But your honor, Serafina protested, your reputation, everything you've built. Honor, Thorne's laugh was bitter sharp as broken glass. What honor is there in burning an innocent woman? What reputation worth keeping requires we stand by while injustice is served? Cale cupped her face, forcing her to meet his eyes. From the moment we walked into this cell tonight, we made a choice. We chose you over duty. We chose conscience over orders. There's no going back from that, Serafina. Win or lose, live or die, we're with you now. The declaration broke something open inside her, some dam she'd built to hold back the flood of emotions. Tears spilled down her cheeks as the full weight of what they were offering crashed over her. These men, these strangers who'd entered her cell mere hours ago, were willing to sacrifice everything for her. Their positions, their reputations, perhaps even their lives. Why, she whispered, searching their faces. Why would you risk so much for someone you barely know? Thorne's expression softened in a way that transformed his harsh features into something almost gentle. Because in 15 years of dealing death, we've learned to recognize what's worth saving. And you, Serafina Whitlock, are worth saving. Besides, Cale added, a hint of dark humor threading through his voice, we didn't barely know you. We knew you the moment we walked through that door and saw you counting stones to keep yourself sane. We knew you when you lifted your chin and refused to beg. We knew you when you told us about healing a dying child despite knowing it would be used against you. We knew your worth, Thorne finished quietly, even if you didn't. Serafina couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. Instead, she reached for them both, pulling them close, needing the solid warmth of their bodies to ground her in this impossible moment. They held her as she cried not from fear anymore, but from the overwhelming recognition that she wasn't alone. That even in this dark cell awaiting execution, she'd found something precious. Connection. Understanding. Maybe even love, though it seemed impossible to name it that after only hours. When her tears finally subsided, exhaustion crashed over her like a wave. The emotional intensity combined with physical exertion had drained her completely. Sleep, Thorne murmured, arranging the furs more comfortably around them. You'll need your strength for whatever tomorrow brings. I don't think I can sleep, Serafina admitted, though her eyes were already growing heavy, not knowing what's waiting at dawn. Then we'll stay awake with you, Kale said simply. Talk to us. Tell us about your mother, about your life before all this. So she did. In the quiet hours before dawn, wrapped between two warriors who'd become her unlikely protectors, Serafina spoke of her childhood, of her mother who'd taught her the names of every healing herb before she could read, of summer days spent in the garden learning which plants eased pain and which brought sleep. She told them about her father dead before she was born, and how her mother had raised her alone with strength and grace, about the cottage she'd inherited, the patients who'd come seeking her help, the satisfaction of healing wounds and easing suffering. And she told them about the loneliness the years spent watching other women find husbands and build families while she remained apart, waiting for something she couldn't name. I never wanted the life they offered, she said softly, her head resting on Kale's chest while Thorne's fingers traced patterns on her hip. Marriage to some farmer who'd see me as property. Children born from duty rather than desire. I wanted more, but I didn't know what. And now, Thorne asked quietly. Serafina considered the question, thinking about the impossible situation she found herself in. Condemned to death, yet lying between two men who'd shown her more tenderness in one night than she'd known in years. Facing execution at dawn, yet feeling more alive than ever before. Now I know what I was waiting for, she admitted. I just wish I'd found it under different circumstances. The circumstances don't matter, Kale said firmly. Only the outcome, and we're not done fighting for that outcome yet. As if to punctuate his words, the first pale fingers of dawn began creeping through the high window of the cell, gray light that heralded the approaching sunrise. The execution hour. Serafina felt her breath catch, fear clawing its way back through the warm cocoon they'd created. Thorne felt the tension in her body and tightened his hold. Not yet, he said, his voice carrying the weight of command. Dawn has barely broken. We have time still. But even as he spoke, footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. Heavy boots, multiple guards. This was it. They'd come to take her to the pyre. Kale and Thorne were on their feet instantly, warriors' instincts overriding everything else. They positioned themselves between Serafina and the door hands, going to weapons they'd set aside during the night. But when the door swung open, it wasn't guards who entered. It was a single man, perhaps 50 years old, with gray threading through dark hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. He wore fine clothes beneath a traveling cloak, still damp with morning dew, and his boots were mud-splattered, as though he'd ridden hard through the night. Lord Chancellor, Thorne said, surprise evident in his tone. What are you doing here? William Ashford's sharp eyes swept the cell, taking in the makeshift bed, Serafina wrapped in a blanket between the two executioners, the obvious intimacy of the scene. One eyebrow rose slightly, but he said nothing about what he observed. Your letter reached me an hour past midnight, he said without preamble. I rode through the night because the situation is more urgent than you know. The execution, Kale began, has been postponed, William interrupted, by my authority as Lord Chancellor and representative of the King's justice. But that's not why I came personally. He stepped fully into the cell, and now Serafina could see the exhaustion in his face, the grim set of his jaw. Tell me quickly, he said, his gaze fixing on Serafina. Is this woman truly innocent? Yes, my lord, Thorne said without hesitation. We've questioned her extensively. The evidence has fabricated the charges baseless. William studied Serafina with eyes that missed nothing. She fought the urge to cover herself more thoroughly, instead lifting her chin and meeting his gaze directly. You are Serafina Whitlock, he said. It wasn't a question. I am my lord, she replied, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. Tell me about the child, Emma, the one you allegedly bewitched. So she did. She explained about the fever, the willow bark tea, the all-night vigil. About Emma's mother begging for help when the physician had given up. About the moment the fever finally broke and the child opened her eyes. There was no magic, my lord, Serafina said firmly. Just medicine. Knowledge my mother passed down, same as any craft passed from parent to child. William was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he said, the physician who pronounced Emma beyond saving was his name Thomas Ashford. Serafina blinked in surprise. Yes, my lord. Why? A ghost of a smile crossed William's face. Because he's my cousin, and he sent me a letter 3 months ago expressing concern about Father Matthias's growing extremism. He wrote that a skilled healer in Thorndale had saved a child he'd given up for dead, and that the priest was calling for her execution. Hope flared in Serafina's chest, bright and painful. Then you already knew. I suspected, William corrected. But suspicion isn't proof. I needed to hear it from you, from them. He gestured to the twins. Thorn and Cale's word carries weight. They're many things, but they're not liars. He pulled a rolled parchment from his cloak. I've drafted an official request for the king's review of this case. It details the irregularities in the trial, questions the evidence, and cites precedent for cases where religious zealotry led to wrongful conviction. Will it work? Cale asked bluntly. I don't know, William admitted. King Edward respects the church's authority. Overturning a conviction for witchcraft sets a dangerous precedent in his eyes. But he also values justice being seen to be done. If I can demonstrate that Magistrate Blackthorn had personal motivation to see you condemned, his son tried to rape me, Serafina said flatly. I defended myself with a cast-iron pan, broke his nose, left a scar. William's expression darkened. That information was not in the trial records. Because Lucian Blackthorn claimed I'd bewitched him, Serafina explained, that no son of the magistrate would want a common healer unless she'd used dark magic to seduce him. Of course he did, William muttered. He made a note on another parchment he produced. This helps, a pattern of false testimony to cover attempted rape, abuse of office for personal revenge. This is something I can work with. He looked up at Thorn and Cale. But it will take time. I need to return to the capital, present this to the king's council, build support among the nobles who will listen. That means days, possibly weeks. The postponement you secured, Thorn said slowly. How long? 3 days, William said grimly. I claimed irregularities in the execution warrant that required review. It won't hold longer than that without arousing suspicion. Then we have 3 days to prove her innocence. Cale said, his jaw set with determination. Or 3 days to disappear, Thorn added quietly. William's sharp eyes fixed on them. If you run, you'll be branded traitors, hunted. The king doesn't forgive desertion, especially from his executioners. We know, Cale said simply. The Lord Chancellor was quiet for a moment, studying the three of them with an expression Serafina couldn't quite read. Then he sighed. 20 years ago, you pulled me from a burning building, he said to the twins. Carried me through hell while I was too wounded to walk. You saved my life at great risk to your own. You owe us nothing, my lord, Thorn said. That debt was paid when you agreed to help. Perhaps, William allowed. But I'll tell you this, if the king rules against her, if he orders the execution to proceed despite everything I present, you'll have 6 hours warning, enough time to disappear before anyone knows you're gone. It was as close to an offer of aid in their potential desertion as the Lord Chancellor could make, without explicitly breaking his oath to the crown. Thank you, Cale said quietly. William nodded once, then turned his attention back to Serafina. You'll be moved from this cell within the hour. The East Tower has more appropriate accommodations for someone awaiting the king's judgment. Thorn and Cale will serve as your personal guards. Officially, they're ensuring you don't attempt escape. Unofficially, he let the sentence hang, but the implication was clear. The twins would be her protection against any further attempts to harm her before the king could rule. I'm grateful, my lord, Serafina said, meaning it with every fiber of her being. Hold your thanks until the king rules, William said. The magistrate won't accept this postponement, quietly. Neither will Father Matthias. They'll see it as a threat to their authority. Watch for retaliation. We will. Thorn promised, his hand moving unconsciously to where his sword usually hung. William moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing. The king will want to know why 2 of his most valued executioners are taking such personal interest in a condemned witch. What should I tell him? The twins exchanged a glance. Some silent communication passed between them, that wordless language only they shared. Then Cale spoke, his voice firm and unwavering. Tell him we believe in justice, my lord, and that sometimes justice requires questioning authority rather than blindly following it. William's lips curved in a slight smile. That's a dangerous philosophy for executioners. Then perhaps, Thorne said quietly, we've been in the wrong profession all along. The Lord Chancellor left with that cryptic exchange hanging in the air. The moment the door closed behind him, Serafina released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. 3 days, she whispered. We have 3 days. 3 days to prove your innocence, Kale agreed, pulling her into his arms. Or 3 days to plan our escape. Either way, Thorne said, moving to stand beside them, you're not going to burn. That much I promise you. Serafina looked up at these two warriors who'd entered her cell as strangers and were now willing to sacrifice everything for her. She didn't have words for what she felt. Gratitude seemed insufficient. Love seemed impossible after only one night. But whatever it was, it burned bright and fierce in her chest. Thank you, she said simply, for everything, for believing me, friend, for fighting for me, for giving me hope when I had none. Always, they said together. And in that moment, wrapped in their arms as pale dawn light crept through the high window, Serafina allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she might actually survive this. That the condemned witch might yet live to see another sunset. That love found in darkness could survive the harsh light of day. The East Tower was a different world from the dungeon cell. Serafina stood in the center of the circular room, hardly able to believe the transformation. Stone walls, yes, but hung with tapestries that softened the cold. A real bed with clean linens and thick furs, a table with chairs, windows, actual windows that looked out over forest and mountains, letting in pale morning sunlight. It's beautiful, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Thorne set down the basin of fresh water he'd carried up the tower stairs. It's temporary, until the king rules. But it's still more than I had yesterday, Serafina said, turning to face both twins. Yesterday I was counting hours until I burned. Today I have windows and hope. Kale crossed to her, pulling her against his chest with the easy familiarity of a man who'd already claimed her body. Today you have us. That's what matters. For the next 4 days they settled into a strange routine. Thorne rode to gather evidence, testimony from Emma's mother, witnesses to Lucian's assault. Kale remained with Serafina, her constant guardian and occasional lover. On the 5th night, Serafina woke to the sound of shattering glass. Kale was already moving, sword in hand, positioning himself between her and the window where 3 dark figures were climbing through. Assassins, hired killers with faces hidden behind black cloth. Stay behind me, Kale commanded, his voice deadly calm. But Serafina didn't cower. Her eyes found the oil lamp on the bedside table. As the first assassin lunged at Kale with a dagger, she grabbed the lamp and swung with all her strength. The glass exploded against the man's skull. He dropped like a stone. Kale's sword flashed silver in the moonlight, cutting down the second attacker with brutal efficiency. The third hesitated, fatal mistake. Kale's blade found his throat. Within seconds, it was over. 2 dead, 1 unconscious. Thorne burst through the door, sword drawn, face twisted with fury at finding the scene. Sarah, are you hurt? I'm fine, she gasped, still clutching the broken lamp base. Her hands were shaking now. Adrenaline fading. I hit one of them. Kale knelt beside the unconscious assassin, checking his pockets. He pulled out a coin purse heavy with gold. 200 pieces, Blackthorn's seal on the pouch. He hired them, Thorne said grimly, trying to silence her before the king can rule. Lord Chancellor William arrived within the hour, summoned by the commotion. He examined the bodies, the gold, the seal. This is attempted murder of a witness under royal protection, William said coldly. Blackthorn just gave me the evidence I need to bury him. After he left, Serafina sat on the bed, still trembling. Kale wrapped her in his arms while Thorne checked the window locks. You were brave, Kale murmured against her hair. You didn't freeze, you fought. I'm not just someone to protect anymore, Serafina said quietly, meeting his eyes. I can stand beside you. The twins exchanged a look of pride and something deeper. Respect. Their woman was a warrior too. The message arrived at dawn on the 3rd day. Kale took the sealed parchment from the royal messenger, his jaw tight as he broke the wax seal. Serafina watched his face, trying to read his expression as he scanned the contents. Well, she asked when she couldn't bear the silence any longer. Kale looked up and his face split into a rare, brilliant smile. The king has ruled in your favor. All charges dismissed. You're free. Serafina's legs went weak. She would have fallen if Kale hadn't caught her, pulling her against his chest as tears streamed down her face. Free, she sobbed. I'm actually free. Completely. Kale confirmed, his own voice rough with emotion. William's presentation convinced the council. The king found evidence of conspiracy between Blackthorn and Matthias to falsely convict you. Both men have been stripped of their positions. Blackthorn's been exiled to the southern wastelands. Kale continued reading from the parchment. Matthias sent to a monastery under permanent silence vows, and you are declared innocent of all charges. The relief was so overwhelming that Seraphina couldn't speak, could only cling to Kyle and weep not from sorrow this time, but from joy so profound it hurt. When Thorn returned that evening with official documents confirming her freedom, they celebrated properly. All three of them in the bed together, worshiping her body with renewed reverence. This time there was no shadow of execution hanging over them, no desperate urgency, just love and desire and the promise of future. But even in their joy, reality intruded. Blackthorn still has allies, Thorn said later as they lay tangled together in the aftermath. An exile doesn't mean death. He could return, could send others. The Lord Chancellor warned us, Kale agreed, said we should consider relocating for safety. Seraphina lifted her head from Thorn's chest. Where would we go? North, Thorn said immediately. There's a village called Northvale at the edge of the Frost Peaks. Remote enough to avoid notice, large enough to need a healer. And guards, Seraphina asked. What would you do there? We're done being executioners, Kale said firmly. We resigned our positions this morning, told the king we're escorting you to safety and won't be returning. You gave up everything for me, Seraphina whispered, overwhelmed once again by the depth of their commitment. We gave up death for life, Thorn corrected. Fair trade. The journey north took 7 days of hard travel. Each night they made camp under the stars, and each night they made love with the freedom of people who no longer had to hide. Under moonlight, Seraphina learned new ways to pleasure them both. Learned how to take Kyle in her mouth while Thorn moved inside her. Learned the exquisite sensation of being filled by both of them simultaneously, their bodies working in perfect rhythm. By the time they reached Northvale, she was thoroughly claimed, thoroughly loved, and thoroughly theirs. The village was small but welcoming. Within a month, they'd purchased a cottage with a large garden where Seraphina could grow her herbs. She opened a healing practice, and soon villagers were coming regularly, grateful for her skill, unconcerned about her past. Thorn and Kale worked as guards and combat trainers, teaching young men the art of defense. Their reputation as former royal executioners preceded them, but in Northvale it commanded respect rather than fear. 3 months after their arrival, a traveling priest came through the village. Father Benedict was old and kind. His theology focused more on love than fear. I've seen many kinds of partnerships in my travels, he said when he noticed how the three of them lived. The heart knows what it needs. If you wish, I could perform a private ceremony, binding you together in the eyes of the divine. The ceremony took place at sunset in a clearing surrounded by pine trees. Seraphina stood between Thorn and Kale, all three holding hands as Father Benedict spoke words of blessing. Do you, Seraphina, claim these men as your own? I do, she said firmly. Do you, Thorn and Kale, claim this woman as your own? We do, they said together. Then by the power vested in me and the grace of the divine, I declare you bound. 3 souls, 1 union. What love has joined, let no authority separate. That night they consummated their union with reverent passion, and 3 months later, Seraphina realized she was carrying a child. Their joy was immeasurable. The letter arrived on a cold autumn morning, delivered by a hooded stranger who vanished before Thorn could question him. Seraphina recognized the seal immediately. Blackthorn. Her hands shook as she broke the wax. The words inside were poison. 10 years in exile. 10 years watching my name dragged through mud while you built paradise. Pay 10,000 gold or I reveal what your husbands truly are, executioners who abandoned their oaths. Your children will be shunned as traitors' spawn. Kale's face went white with rage when he read it. I'll ride to his estate tonight. 1 throat cut, problem solved. No, Seraphina said firmly, placing her hand on his chest. We left that life behind. We don't kill anymore. He's threatening our children, Thorn growled, pacing like a caged wolf. That changes everything. It changes nothing, Seraphina insisted. We face him with truth, not more blood. 3 days later, Seraphina rode to Blackthorn's crumbling estate alone on horseback, though. Thorn and Kale shadowed her through the forest, hidden but close. Godric Blackthorn was old now, his face lined with bitterness. He sat in a manner that reeked of decay and failed ambition. Come to pay, he sneered. I came to tell you no, Seraphina said, chin lifted. You were corrupt. I was innocent. The king's justice was served. You cannot stomach that truth. Your executioners abandoned their posts, Blackthorn snarled. That's desertion. Treason. They resigned with royal permission, Seraphina corrected. King Edward himself signed their release. You have no leverage, Godric, only impotent rage. Blackthorn stood signaling to guards. Then you'll disappear. No body, no proof. 6 men moved toward her, but Seraphina smiled. I wasn't speaking to you just now. I was speaking to Lord Chancellor William, who's been standing in your doorway for the past minute. Blackthorn spun. William Ashford stood flanked by royal soldiers, having followed Seraphina on the king's orders. Godric Blackthorn, William said coldly, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, extortion, and threatening a witness under permanent royal protection. As soldiers dragged the screaming magistrate away, Thorn and Cale emerged from the shadows. You took a terrible risk, Thorn said, though pride gleamed in his eyes. I knew you were watching, Seraphina replied, and I knew William would come. I sent him a letter 3 days ago detailing everything. Cale laughed, pulling her into his arms. Strategic. Our wife learned from the best. The threat was ended. Their family was safe. 1 week later, Seraphina went into labor with their 4th child, which brought them full circle back to the birthing room, back to the moment Casimir entered the world, back to Seraphina, nearly dying and saving herself with shepherd's purse. When the midwife finally left them alone, the 3 of them sat together on the bed. Seraphina held Casimir, while Thorn and Cale flanked her, their hands resting protectively on their growing family. 4 children, Seraphina marveled, her voice full of wonder. Alaric, our firstborn. Thaddeus and Isolde, the twins who came together. And now Casimir, our youngest. 3 sons and our precious daughter, Cale murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. Our family is complete. Through the window, they could see their other children playing in the garden. 9-year-old Alaric teaching his younger siblings the names of healing herbs. 8-year-old twins, Thaddeus and Isolde, racing through the vegetable rows. And now Casimir, the youngest, completing their family. Tell me again, Seraphina said softly, how did we get here? Thorn's features softened with memory. 10 years ago, we walked into a cell to watch a woman burn. And instead we saved her, Cale continued. We saved each other, Seraphina finished. She looked at the 2 men who'd risked everything for her, who'd given up positions and prestige and safety to build this life, who loved her with a devotion that never wavered. Former executioners who'd become healers of a different kind. Warriors who'd chosen love over duty. Men who'd walked into darkness and brought light. I was condemned to burn, Seraphina said quietly, her voice full of wonder. I should have died screaming in agony, alone and terrified. Instead, I found you. Found this. She gestured to their home, their children, the life they'd built from ashes. Sometimes the condemned don't just survive, Thorn said, pressing a kiss to her temple. They triumph. Sometimes, Cale added, his hand gentle on their newborn son's tiny head. The darkest moments lead to the greatest light. Outside, the sun set over the frost peaks, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Their children's laughter drifted through open windows. The scent of herbs from Seraphina's garden mixed with pine from the surrounding forest. And in that moment, surrounded by family filled with love, safe in the arms of the men who'd saved her, Seraphina knew with absolute certainty that she would choose this life, this love, this family over and over again for all eternity. The condemned witch had become a queen in her own right. The executioners had become protectors. And love found in the deepest darkness had survived to flourish in glorious light.